Meeting of the Grosse Ile Township Planning Commission will come to order. Would you all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we get into the agenda items, I would like to take a moment here and introduce our newest Planning Commission member, John Rathel. John is a veteran of many campaigns on the Planning Commission from years and years ago, probably decades ago, matter of fact. And it's our good fortune that he has decided that he wanted to contribute on the Planning Commission again, and so the board appointed him, and we're glad to see him. John, would you like to say a few words?
Well, just thank you for that welcome, John, and I'm excited to be back. I've always had a passion for planning, and even though I haven't been here, believe it or not, I'm one of the guys actually watching these meetings out there. So it's really nice to be back. Thank you.
We're glad to have you. Okay, moving on to the agenda. Any changes, additions, or deletions to the agenda? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda as submitted.
So moved.
Motion from Eric, support.
Support.
Support from Steve. Call to question. All in favor?
Aye.
Approved. Next item is the review of the regular meeting minutes from October 28, 2018. Does anyone have any questions on those minutes? Hearing no comments, I will entertain a motion to approve as submitted.
So moved.
Support, or motion from Eric, support.
Support.
Support from Jim. Call to question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion carried. Lori, as usual. Thank you. Next item is public comment, an opportunity for citizens to speak about issues which are not on the agenda. Does anybody have any questions or comments not on the agenda? Seeing no hands, we'll move on to the first item of business, which is a pre-application conference for West Shore Golf and Country Club. The applicant is Waterview Acquisitions, LLC. Their address is 19855 West Outer Drive, Suite 202, West in Dearborn. The owner of the property is West Shore Golf and Country Club, 228543 West River Road, Grosse Ile. The location, common description, is it's a 10-acre parcel running along the north side of the West Shore Golf Course and Country Club. The closest intersection to it is Balmoral Drive. Balmoral Drive, the south end of that, dead ends at this property line with West Shore. The legal description for this property is Grosse Ile sub number 31, section 551 and 555. The property in question is primarily wooded, and it has the golf course maintenance building or maintenance facilities there on that 10-acre parcel. The zoning for this property is R1D, residential single-family district D. Because it is undeveloped, there is an overlay district called R1E, which imposes a higher lot area requirement on this property for development. So it's an R1D with an R1E overlay. The proposal is multiple elements, has multiple elements to it. First, there's a lot split. The proposal is to split off 10 acres, this parcel on the north side from the golf course. Then the second request is to rezone that property from single-family residential R1E to multifamily R2 residential. Then the third request is site plan review, which would encompass roads, utilities, buildings, basically the layout. The next is another site plan review. As I mentioned, the golf course maintenance building is on that property, and the proposal is to move it to the southeast corner of the golf course, near the corner of Meridian and Ferry. Carrying on, the next is a special land use for a marina, a 38-slip marina, which would be located across West River Road, opposite the West Shore Clubhouse parking lot. And then finally, a site plan review for the actual marina itself. So this is six major steps that are involved in this particular application. There are multiple ordinances which come into play here. The first is Article 25, which is the amendments to the zoning ordinance. Under this article are the standards by which rezoning a piece of property are defined and the process by which it's done. Second is Chapter 338 of the Municipal Code. This is the Subdivision Control Act. And there is an article, again, a second article in the Municipal Code, Chapter 71, which deals specifically with condominiums. And it references back those elements which are applicable from 238 subdivision control in the condominium process. So again, it's a bit complicated. Obviously, the next one down the line is special land use. That's Article 22, and that would be for the marina. And then Article 21, the site plan review process. There would be independent reviews for the maintenance building and the marina. So, multiple steps, multiple amendments, multiple ordinances come into play here, multiple public hearings. This will be a long, drawn-out process. Tonight we are at step one, which is simply a pre-application review. It's an opportunity for the applicant to introduce the project to the public and to the Planning Commission. And there'll be no Planning Commission vote tonight. As far as specifically how we process this through all the multiple steps, there's Planning Commission involvement and there's Township Board involvement. The Township Board in rezoning and in special land use has the final say-so, and consequently, this project cannot proceed piecemeal to the board. Okay, and we have discussed it about the possibility of working through all the Planning Commission issues through these various different elements of the project, and then at that point, when the Planning Commission is certain that all elements of the zoning ordinance requirements are met, then it would go as a single package to the board for their review. That's the most systematic way to do it. It's complicated, but I think that it makes the most sense. So the board will see this. It's just going to be somewhere down the road.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Just real quickly. So in that process, there would also be, how many public hearings would be involved with that process?
Multiple. I don't know at this point.
At least one on special land use and at least one on redistricting or rezoning?
And the marina. The marina is also a public hearing. So there's a little more background to this. We being the officers, Steve and Jay Frucci and I, had multiple concept review sessions with the applicant. I think I was at 3, and I think I missed 2 actually. So there could have been as many as 5 over the last 4 months, 5 months. I've forgotten exactly. The purposes of those reviews are defined in Article 21 of the site plan ordinance, and there it defines that when we have these meetings, the officers are to assist the applicants to help them to anticipate what questions the full Planning Commission is actually going to ask, and to provide basic overall guidance as to what the ordinances say to help the applicant to prepare the plan. I should also mention that in addition to the chair and the vice chair and the secretary, Brian Borden, our planner, was in on all this as well. to lend the ordinance expertise. It is important for commissioners to know when we have these meetings, you know, we are absolutely, as participants, we make no judgments whatsoever regarding our opinions regarding the project. None. Okay? We're not telling them it's a good project. We're not telling them it's a bad project. What we're telling them is here are questions, here are things that will come up, to give the applicant the opportunity to prepare. The last thing that the officers want to have is an ineffective planning commission meeting where all of a sudden questions come out of the woodwork from the planning commissioners that the applicant has no opportunity to prepare or respond to. Now, there's no guarantee that what the officers have identified as questions or all the questions are going to come up. Every commissioner has got their own thoughts and opinions and questions. However, with the seniority of the officers, we think there's a pretty good chance that we got maybe 90% of them. Okay, and this is what goes on in these concept review meetings. So again, no opinions rendered, simply assistance given. Is that clear? Okay. At this point, I will stop. And Brian, would you like to say a few words first?
I don't know that I have much else to add, Mr. Chair. I think you've covered it quite well.
Okay, then we'll go to the applicant. Who is presenting, please?
Good evening.
Good evening. Would you give us your name and address, please?
Certainly. I'm John Hennessy with Hennessy Engineers. My address is 21119 Knudsen, Groseal, Michigan. And
Welcome.
thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I have Mike Brock with my office.
Mike Brock with Hennessy Engineers in Southgate.
Brock?
Mario Ferrante.
Mario Ferrante, Help You Sell Real Estate, broker, owner of Help You Sell, 1700 Kenwood, Trenton, Michigan.
Gentlemen.
And we also have the president of the board of West Shore with us as well. They won't really be presenting, but they're here as an informational and support component to it. I think the chairman did a very good job in kind of succinctly framing the project and the developer as well.
That's correct.
Sam. And so we appreciate, I think it was framing the project through there. There is certainly a lot of complexity to this project. What we're here tonight to do is to talk a little bit about some of the steps that we've been through, not only with the executive component of the Planning Commission, but some of the surrounding neighbors through there, why we think that this is a good project for the community as a whole through there, and then talk about the overall master plan of the project through there. So do you want to?
Where's the slide?
Yep.
The slide there.
So obviously this is the master plan. The current zoning ordinance is through there. You can see where our site is through there. We're at the very northeast corner of the golf course through there. It is R1D. Obviously, per the zoning ordinance, if you were to propose a lot split, which is one of the things that we're doing, it will enact the R1E overlay district through there, which are 30,000 square foot lots through there. We're looking at approximately 10 acres that is currently a wooded site through there that is not being utilized by the golf course in any area. It has the maintenance shed, which occupies a small portion of it. The maintenance shed itself is in a 4,000 square foot building, so you can imagine over a 10-acre parcel, it's not very much of an impact on there. And if we were to go to the next slide, it shows the this would be the existing land use per ordinance. It's an R1D, which is 20,000 square foot units through there. This has 8 lots that are that match the R1E overlay zoning through there. As the chairman said, we're coming off of an existing roadway through there. We're proposing that the lots, if the lots were to be constructed in this format, you would have an offset, a buffer zone between the existing housing and a potential roadway through there, and then the lots would face the golf course, would be the most desirable component for the lots through there. This zoning, and Mario's going to speak to this, and why we don't feel that this zoning actually works in the community. I don't think it represents the current trends of the community that are looking to buy homes in this area. They're quite quite large lots, 30,000 square foot lots. There's quite a bit to take care of through there. And that's why we're proposing this project that's in front of you with the conditional R2 zoning through there. And I'm going to let Mario speak to some of the components, which will be on the next slide through there.
So on the next slide, I just provided, and so you guys know, I also sit on Trenton Planning, and so Groseal faces a lot of challenges, just like Trenton does. One of the reasons we're proposing, or the developer is proposing, is kind of it's going with the current demographics of what's happening in the area. I've provided, and I won't bore you to death, but I've provided some SEMCOG regional statistics on how the aging population is happening in the area and with Groseal. And as you're aware, again, I won't bore you, but as you're aware, we have less and less permit starts for larger type homes on large lots. The aging demographic is getting older. The community is getting older. There's less and less families moving in with large families with a lot of children. It's generally 2 children or less. So I've provided, and if you go through a couple of these schematics that I provided for you guys through SEMCOG, you'll see some actual numbers on what happened from 2015, from 2010 to 2015, and what the projections are for 2045. And again, I'll just do an overlay very quickly. It basically says that the population isn't really growing that much. It's probably decreasing, that the population tends to decrease and it tends to get older. We find that an older population is not looking for, 30,000 square foot lots with 5,000 square foot homes on it. That was something probably that was occurring in Groseal and in Trenton back in the 80s and 90s, especially in the 90s. It seemed like the economy was such that people were looking for that. I own a real estate office, a pretty sizable real estate office in a local area. The aging demographic, the clients that we work with are just not looking at. They're actually downsizing. They're looking to downsize their property but stay in the area and try to alleviate as much maintenance as possible. We believe that this condo project that we're projecting is a luxury condo project. That's something that Groseal doesn't have of this nature, that has condominiums attached to it. These are homes of 1,800 to 2,200 square foot, depending on what the applicant wishes. They all have first floor bedrooms with, and this is some projections, some of what they would look like. They all have first floor bedroom Cape Cods with the master bedroom on the main level, and there would be some sort of Jack and Jill bedrooms upstairs with Jack and Jill bath upstairs, but the priority would be for main level living. Now, this is not to say that this is designed to be a senior site plan. That's not what the projection is, but the reality of the economics are these are post $300,000 condos with docks. Your average 25-year-old with a young family was not going to be looking for these with association fees to be buying these type of homes. Just to give you a little bit of the demand for Groseal, last year in 365 days in Groseal, there were approximately 200 listings. Of those 200 listings, there were 140 sales that occurred. Out of those 200 listings, about 50 of the homes did not sell. Many of the homes that did not sell were the larger homes with the higher prices and the higher yards. In terms of how that is compare and contrast to the condo market on Groseal, the condo market last year, there were 48 listings last year. 44 of them sold. Of the 4 that did not sell, 2 of them are pending. There's probably about a 98% list to sale ratio on condos. The condos probably sell in a third of a time in times of time on the market that the houses do. The demand is very heavy in the city of Groseal because of the aging dynamic of the population. We feel that this condo project is for that aging population is still dynamic. It's for people that are active, that want to golf, that want to boat. And we just think it would be very positive for the community to have something of this nature.
Thank you. And we're going to go into a little bit more about the project as an overall comprehensive project. As the chairman mentioned, there's a lot of facets to this project. There are really 3 particular phases to this. The first phase is the 10.2 acres that we're discussing tonight for the potential rezoning for the conditional R2 zoning. which is, we're going to get into a little bit greater detail on that, but that's off of that. That the Phase 2, which has to happen concurrently with Phase 1, obviously, is the relocation of the maintenance shed through there, which is a 5,000 square foot building that will be constructed through there. It's going to be more efficient than the existing maintenance shed through there, and more beneficial for the use of the Greens director through there. And then lastly is Phase 3, which will be the marina through there, which the marina has a little bit of history. I don't know if everyone remembers that. I know the chairman does. We've spoke with that. That was previously permitted through the township, and we had gotten all the way through our MDEQ permits, and we did not get the final site plan permit. We were given preliminary site plan approval. We received the MDEQ permits, and then the economy tanked, and the project was no longer feasible through there. The original marina had 4 fingers through it. This one that we're proposing has 3, so it's a contraction to that. The marina is meant to be a condominium that is going to be associated with the condominium units through there, with a few transient wells just for the club, for people that may want to come in and bring guests through there, limited to 3 to 4 wells overall. And one of the largest questions, I think, in my experience in the previous marina were overnight stays. Was a very much a concern of the commission through there and the public through there. Obviously, these boats, there will not be overnight stays through there because these are going to be owned by the individuals. And there's been just as Mario's discussed, there's a change in the demographics in the community, and people are looking to downsize and maybe not have these larger estate-style homes through there. There's actually been a significant change in the boating industry as well, and anybody who's been to the boat show knows this. You can see a substantial amount of pontoon boats that are very capable of traveling long distances through there, are quite comfortable. The original marina was designed much more for cabin cruisers, substantially larger boats through there in the range, really from 35 to 45 feet. We don't anticipate that. We anticipate that we're going to have much more day boating style boats through there, pontoon boats and such like that. And as Mario said, this is really going to provide a unique opportunity for someone to be a very active person, to golf and to boat and to have a lot of things associated with their housing component through there. So we're going to just step through, obviously, what's in front of us.
John, I'd like to mention one thing.
Yeah, sure.
If you don't mind. Also, it's important to know that the developer is fully aware, and West Shore has some control on the sale of the property and how it affects the golf course. Obviously, we're very concerned about and I'm also a member of West Shore, by the way. We're very concerned how it impacts the golf course. And it's very important to us, which the developer knows, there's certain criteria that we have as well from the developer as well. One of them is that these will be condominiums, which is very important to know from the standpoint is under the HOAs, these will not be allowed to be rented docks. Somebody cannot separate the deed. These come with deed restriction, which the condominium must move with the unit. It's important to know that from only a standpoint is because I've seen other phases, and I've seen it in Trenton as well, where they've attempted during different economies to attempt to make the deeds different so people can lease it out and make it transient docking, things of this nature. That won't be allowed on the HOA, and we'll probably do that by deed restriction itself. So it would be impossible to overcome the deed restriction. They would have to move with the unit, other than the 3 or 4 transit docks that we would make available for West Shore for people to come eat and golf from West Shore. That would be it. But no overnight stays, of course.
But no overnight stays, which was one thing that was really a concern. So this is a little bit of a larger blow-up of a proposed site plan through there. One thing I would like to mention to the commission is that as Chairman mentioned, we've had a number of meetings through there, but even prior to that, we've met with the surrounding adjacent property owners. We've told them of this plan that we've had. We've had meet and greets at the club through there, and we've offered the property to all of the adjacent property owners through there. We've surveyed all of their property. Some of them encroached friendly onto our property. We let them know that, that some of these things had to be moved, that this was delineated our property boundaries through there, and that if there was an interest, that they could purchase this property individually and extend their property lines and prevent that. There was really not much of an interest at all by any of the adjacent property owners to do that. We've told them that our next intent was to move forward with a potential development through there that we thought would be a good fit, not only for the community, but would be, as Mario has mentioned, the appropriate, the supply isn't currently present within the island to facilitate that, and that we would fill a need of a housing need within the community. So to go through a little bit of the details of the development through there, it's a site condominium. It's a condominium development. We have private roadway through there. We're looking for a conditional R2 development. So conditional means that we will put constraints upon ourselves within the development. R2 allows for 5.8 units per acre. We're at 3.1 units per acre through there, and you can see that we're allowed 59 units per this size, and we're proposing 32 units, which is a 46% reduction. Some of the things that we have is a 50-foot buffer to the north, which will be a no construction zone buffer, and we're allowing 18 feet outside of the building envelope to construct the building. Obviously, you have to have a certain amount of space outside of the building to construct the building itself, but we're looking to preserve as much of the woodlands, especially to the north. To the north, where the adjacent property owners are, there's going to be a 50-foot buffer that will have no construction zone whatsoever in it through there. We're looking for first floor livings to accommodate that, and we're looking for units that fit the size of the R2 zoning through there. We're looking to incorporate the stormwater management with the existing golf course. And one thing we can do with this development that as opposed to the 8 lots that you saw in front of you, which is really just kind of a clear-cut approach to development through there. When you develop subdivisions, you have to have rear and the storm lines in the back and all of these things. This will allow us to work with the existing features within the wooded area so that we can not only make it more desirable for our future residents through there, but have less of an impact on the golf course. The golf course is very concerned about that. Obviously, the board of the golf course and the adjacent property owners. How do you go back one? Yep, through there. So that's the Cliff Notes version of it. If we've had a longer periods, but we're here to answer any questions the commission may have, and we certainly appreciate the time that has been put into this project for us and your comments, and looking forward to working with you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hennessy. Let's ask first, Brian, from what you've heard, have you any comments at this point?
No, I'm good, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, let's see anybody in the audience. I can't see any hands back there. Anybody want to say something about this?
All our team.
Oh, that's your team? Oh, okay. No?
We're in favor of it.
Okay. Well, I guess that answers that question. All right, then let's come back to the table and let's see what initial thoughts or comments that commissioners might have. Steve was in, a lot of the concept review meetings, and so I'll start with you, Steve.
Thank you very much. Wonderful presentation. Appreciate the opportunity to be part of the process. Definitely, this is a very large project, as you outlined, 3 phases. It seemed like a lot of phases, but boy, is it going to be a lot of work, both on your end, whoever builds this, and everybody else. I definitely appreciate the discussion around the community involvement, getting them, though you already approached them, but getting them again at the table to really talk about what works, what doesn't work, I think is excellent for the commission to hear, and also for the public that's watching TV right now to hear that. Outside of those comments and compliments to you, I don't have anything else. I didn't hear any red flags that popped up in my mind that was different today from the previous discussions that we've had. So with that, I look forward to hearing the discussion of the other commissioners and thoughts that they may have on this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Mr. Davis.
Thank you. A couple questions. With the marina, you had mentioned it was previously fully approved for the recession?
We had received preliminary site plan approval. Then we were required to get our permits from the DEQ and the agencies and come back for final site plan approval, which was, I don't want to say an administrative component, but what the reality was, if there were any modifications that the agency had to the original preliminary site plan, that would have to be presented and approved by the Planning Commission, then the board. And We did receive the DEQ permit, but then the economy fell through, and so it was not presented. And there were no modifications from the DEQ's component. But we realized we're starting all over again. You know, we're starting from square one in that regard.
As far as the lots, Brian, I guess I can ask you, but I'm happy to hear you approached the neighbors and offered them an option, right? So that would have been interesting if one of them would have said yes. I don't know how that would have worked into the plan, but it would have been an interesting little vacant lot.
Oh, we offered, I can
Yeah, you-
comment on that. So what we did is, the very first thing that we did, about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, we sent everybody a letter and letting them know that there was a potential project on its way. And
That's it. The people on that road that are.
It impacts approximately 10 people, is that they actually touch the property line. So, and we let them know that, there was some encroachment going on our property line, that we would be restaking the property for future land development use. Then, once that occurred, about a year later, we got back with them and we told them that we're going to think about putting the property for sale, and that before we put it for sale, we would like to entertain all of them to come in and have an opportunity to make an offer to purchase the property as a group, okay? And as a group, we were offering them substantially lower, by 2/3 lower than what we're offering it to the developer for. We also, as a real estate broker, I made it available to each one, what we were thinking to do is actually extend their lot line through the property and actually give them golf course property, which, from a real estate perspective, I thought it was a good pitch, that you're actually getting golf course property, and we were offering it for a very reduced sum, which I'll tell you what it was. It was approximately $40,000 a lot, and we were offering terms with that for $5,000 to $10,000 down over 10 years. The payment would have been minimal. The actual market impact of their property, the value they would have gotten for it, was in excess to the $40,000 of what the land we were offering them. There was one caveat. They had to buy it as bulk, each 10% to extend. We weren't going to disjoin or change the land setting of the property use and have somebody have a 200-foot lot, then somebody back here not have that 200-foot. Everybody had to do the same thing all the way through to the golf course, and which, quite honestly, would have ensured that no future development would have ever been in their backyard. And we told them that we would make terms, we offered terms dollar down. There were 3 people of interest. None of them were of interest except for one that was willing to pay the freight. It was one neighbor, and that particular neighbor, quite honestly, he offered to buy 3 of the freights, but the problem I had with that is that, again, I couldn't change his property line. It had to be, the setbacks had to be all the way through from their property line all the way through back to the golf course. So we made that offering, and then after that offering, we had a meet and greet with hors d'oeuvres and appetizers and some drink at our country club. We offered it to them again, stressing that we were going to move forward with the developer if they could not come to a consensus. They did draft me a letter on what their consensus was, and it was nowhere near what we needed to be able to do the project. So that's how that actually occurred. You're welcome.
I'm trying to think of other condo. I always like to go back to the history, Brian. Other condos in the area, Groseal, that we've actually rezoned to have condos, because it just didn't start off as a condo zoning area, but since with the purchase of the land, then we can then change it to be.
I don't have anything in my tenure with the township. I mean, Hawthorne Glen was developed quite a few years before I started working here. That's the other one that jumps out as kind of attached unit, kind of Hawthorne Glen.
Yeah, but that was probably all woods, though, right? And so it probably didn't have.
The history behind it, I don't know if it was always zoned and planned for attached units. But
Oh, it wasn't. It was a result of court suit. It was rezoned as a result of the court, not because the township asked for it. And this goes back prior to my being on the planning commission. Since I've been on the planning commission in the late 80s, we've had no rezoning relative to condominiums. The only rezoning we've done was creation of the R1F district, which was with the Hickory Island. There's been nothing in the way of condos. But condos are already allowed in the Macomb Street district. You know, that was not a rezone. That's an inherent right in the Macomb
Trying to
Street.
think of where we've changed zoning, right? Because that's what we're doing here essentially, changing zoning to allow condos, which they aren't allowed at the present time.
At least in my tenure.
Okay.
As a-
Okay. I was pleased to see that you're allowed 52 condos, and you're only going to put 32 in.
That's one thing I would like to stress is that Hawthorne is really kind of, they're at the max of the R2. They're a dense property use, and we're close to half of what their proposed land use is, and we're cognizant of the neighbors and things like that. So, and we realize that this is a unique project that fits with the golf course and the marina and the adjacent. So we're not trying to put too much into a small bag.
I don't think we're here to make a bunch of comments.
No.
But, one, just question, there's a 50-foot, it looks like you put like a 50-foot radius around the whole area, which is great, leaving trees and whatnot. Does it make more sense, and I'm not here to change the idea, but move it more towards the golf course and further away, so you create like a 75-foot between the residents and 25 to the golf course? It's just a shift. I don't know if that makes anybody happier or not at the end of the day, but just a question.
We're certainly.
You don't have to really respond to it.
Oh no, actually I would like to respond to that a little bit because that makes a lot of sense. That's something that will come really, as I anticipate, in fruition during site plan component through there, because we'll have a little bit more level, we'll have a greater level of detail of the natural features of the site. But one thing I would like to identify is that we do have a clearing line, and so at its closest point, that buffer is 50 feet. At its greatest point, it's about, I think,
70, 80 feet.
it's 80 feet through
Like
there.
88 on mine.
Yeah, 88 through there. So it follows that the curvature of the roadway through there. But obviously, when we get into a site plan level of specificity, we'll be able to get to there if there's a need to shift it over through there. But we're not opposed at all to working with the commission in that regard.
If I may, Mr. Chair, too, there is, one of the things that would occur when a conditional rezoning is considered, there aren't variances that can come with that. So in essence, they volunteer conditions that are more restrictive than what the ordinance allows, but they cannot be less restrictive. And in this case, the outer perimeter R2 setback requirements would essentially be 50 feet. So there is something to that. I understand the desire to try to protect the existing residences and have them closer to the golf course. That type of a shift, in all likelihood, would result in the need for a variance, which can't be granted via the conditional rezoning process. It would have to be its own separate consideration. So I'm not saying that it shouldn't be. If it's a way to improve the project and a way to protect the neighborhood, then there may be something to that. But understand that would be adding sort of another layer to this whole request, and another complex layer at that.
I don't have any further questions right now, but thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Ranka.
Yeah, a couple questions. So, what's the difference between this and like a PUD or a planned urban development?
So well, for starters, the township does not have PUD regulations, so we don't have that tool to rely upon for starters. If we did, the biggest difference between conditional rezoning and planned unit development is that a planned unit development is more has the opportunity for more negotiation. There can be more back and forth from the township and the applicant. Conditional rezoning is much more one-sided, where the applicant volunteers the conditions, and we have little to no authority to modify those conditions. So it has to be considered on its merits with what they offer as their own restrictions. We technically can't suggest to them that they should, we would consider it favorably if they further reduced the density or if they further increased the buffer zone, those types of things. You have to consider it as it's offered. So it's much more one-sided from the applicant to the township for consideration, as opposed to a little more back and forth that you could get with the planned unit development.
Trust me, as a planner, we would have preferred to bring it to you as a plan. I can comment a little bit about that. The ordinance, the township used to have a PUD ordinance, going back to again, the 1980s. It was a disaster. It was a disaster because we were dealing with developers who basically, well, I have to watch my words, were not, had little interest in the values of the community. And it resulted in intense conflict and unsuccessful developments, or developments which would have gone in had not the township board interceded and purchased the property through open space. At that point, the community said, we're done with that ordinance, and we wiped it off the map. It was a disaster. That's it.
Really, the only mechanism is an ordinance change, or a zoning change, I should say.
For this number of units and the attachment of units, yes. Yes, there are other development options, which they showed you kind of the conventional
R1.
zoning model, right, which would result in roughly eight
Units.
So yeah, to get the tool that the township has available for attachment and for 32 units on this 10-acre piece is a conditional rezoning. Or, I mean, a rezoning in general, but I think the idea of the conditions, to me, are crucial to consideration of this, because I think the word a conventional R2 request, opening up the door for 50-plus potential units, I think is a different conversation than 30 units, just in terms of the impacts, the traffic, the infrastructure, the serious impacts on the neighborhood, the natural environment, those types of things.
Question for the applicant on the dock sizes that you're looking at.
We anticipate that the original dock configurations were substantially larger, from 35 to 45 feet through there, but we're really anticipating 25 to 30 feet, to facilitate day boating as we see more popular currently.
Right now, it's set with 3 docks. Is there a thought of further or future expansion to 4 or 5 docks?
No, it's 3. There are 38 through there, and we have 32 units, and so it might be, or 37, I believe.
Yeah, 37.
37. So the rest would be designated as transient docks, which would be day docks only through there, and not overnight docks through there, and they'd be documentium. So we only need as many as we have for the units, and then some of the transient docks that are just really a result of how you construct the docks through there, because the seawall to the north and things like that facilitate that. They're kind of a windfall profit, so to speak.
My questions.
Thank you, Eric. Huda.
Thank you. First of all, I want to apologize for my ignorance, but has the property already been sold, or is that contingent on approval to move forward with the project? If yes, speak into the microphone so the people at home
Right
can
now,
hear.
everybody's operating under good faith and a letter of intent. We can't really technically draw a purchase agreement up at this point from a legal standpoint, because we don't have the legal boundaries defined. Mr. Hennessy, his engineering firm, until we got preliminary site plan approval at least, we can't really define the boundaries. Therefore, there's nothing really to sell at this point.
I just noticed you're all wearing multiple hats in this project, and I just wanted to make sure I had the story straight. I know we're not giving opinions, but I did want to address something that I think the board will consider when it comes to you, and that is when you describe the project in terms of the SEMCOG data. which I appreciate that you did, and I do not argue with the finding. I understand demographic shifts in communities. At the same time, there's a huge interest in the community to bring in more families with children because we want to fill seats in our schools and we want to keep our school vibrant. And so I don't know if I'm planting a seed, but remember that the board and the township in general are looking to fill two different kinds of housing needs that you might be able to accomplish within the same project.
Well, the square footage, that's a valid point. I mean, obviously, the school district's going to look at the price per pupil, and that's going to be determined based on the amount of bedrooms provided. These are not two-bedroom or one-bedroom efficiencies. These are designed to be 3 bedrooms, which can more than accommodate a family, and that's the whole purpose for the Jack and Jill bedrooms upstairs. So we did kind of take that into thought. It's not to say that this would not be a family home. It's just saying that from a real estate perspective, I'm not going to be dishonest about it. I know what this lends itself to. These are people of upper incomes, and I just don't see a young family affording this type of luxury condo project. However, for the ones that can afford it, there will be no restrictions, I assure you.
If I can make one quick point on that as well, I think that brings up an excellent point. We're looking at community retention here. We're looking for people that currently live in a 4-bedroom home, perhaps, that their children, they're empty nesters, that want to stay in the community. And as Mario says, there's a lack of demand here, the lack of supply, 44 units over a year. And, so that will free up another home to bring a family in here. I mean, I have young children in this community as well, so.
So that may be another way to frame the argument when you.
No, I think that's an excellent point. Yeah, we're really looking for community retention for this. We don't anticipate our buyers to be people from outside the community coming here to buy this. We look for people that are long-standing community members that are looking to downsize.
And still maintain some of the features that they had in their bigger homes. I
That's right.
understand that.
Sir, can you stay at the table, please?
Sure, I'm sorry, John. To answer your question, though, but for that vacuum that's going to be filled, is that once that 4 or 5 bedroom home, it was 3,500 square feet, and an empty nester moves into the condo, we believe those 4 bedrooms are still there for a young family to come in and buy that property.
And I think, I'm just saying, as a board member, that's going to be an argument that the board members are going to be looking for.
Well noted.
Looking to hear some of that. I'm also interested, real quick, about the docks, and I do already know the answer to this, but I wanted it to be known. As you know, the Grosse Ile Rowing Club has an interest in a portion of the West Shore property for a future development of a rowing facility. And I know that they plan, if this all goes through, to put in an annual dock, a floating dock for the boats. But you have, with the commissioners, already discussed this with the rowing people, and I think that's very good. Thank you.
Yes, well, I'll answer to that because I actually did the lease agreement for the rowing club for the club. So the rowing club does have a portion of that leased, and they do have docks they can pull in and out. We have met with the rowing club, and part of our contract with the rowing club is they actually have to give their approval for this. We have met with them and showed them our plan. Obviously, we don't want something that would interfere with the rowing club. Actually, quite honestly, I think this is going to be very complimentary to the rowing club. So, and they're excited about it. But yeah, we actually have to seek their approval because they're under a lease agreement with West Shore, and under that lease agreement, they cannot unreasonably withhold a future development for a marina. They would just like some input on it, which we are going to grant them.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Rathel.
Boy, what a fantastic planning issue to come back to.
First meeting.
Welcome back, John.
So, I think basically the way that I see this, and this is my very first meeting and hearing about the 3 phases. And by the way, I was very involved, and I think Luda was on the board when
Sure.
Luda and I were on the board together at that time, and Eric was, I think, here with John when that came, and it's unfortunate at the time he did.
Sure.
That would have been in our record. we have to go through again, okay, it's hard to not have an opinion because people's opinion of this is gonna make it go or not, right? We know what we have to do, there's a bunch of zoning ordinances that need to be changed for this to happen. So I am going to give just some of my comments on what I've heard tonight. Having senior active housing on Groseal is a must. We also have to concentrate, like we did senior housing. This board here put together a senior housing apartment complex on Macomb Street, which took care of a segment of our population. It was an aging population that people went into. And then there's new homes going up, right? We want more, and we need more kids in single-family homes and traditional homes to fill up our schools. Those will continue. But I am one of those guys that had to downsize, and I had nowhere to go other than a condo, so we ended up buying a two-bedroom house and basically having to gut the whole thing and tear it all down. So I think from the standpoint of where we're at as a community, this is a need for sure. As far as the logistics of where this is going up, I know the site. I haven't walked it. I haven't talked to any of the neighbors. You know, this is why, like John said, there's going to be multiple public hearings on this because we need to take in consideration everything with this. So looking at that, I think it's a good first step, and I'm excited to hear more about it. I do have a couple questions, though. One is, when we look at the marina tied, which wasn't tied to a condo site before, right? It was
That's right, it was a standalone marina.
It's now tied to a condo site that, to me, Miles will be on Macomb Street. What's the connection? You know, to me, they're going to have to drive all the way around and basically get to their boat, right? I mean, it's
Well, we're hoping that, you know, there would be some type of social membership and residual to the West Shore Country Club, which most of these people will have golf carts and things of this nature, where part of that HOA will include, if with their social membership to West Shore, they'll be able to walk the grounds, use the cart path accordingly. There's a cart path that goes from right there to the parking lot right there. It's not that far of a walk.
Well, the idea is to make this part and parcel to a country club and the active lifestyle country club, different investments from the country club, pickleball, the things that.
To get the synergy of all of the components.
Okay, so that's an important part of your process?
Absolutely.
All right, no one's talked about phase two. I just think that is a really weird place to put the maintenance shed. And I'm not gonna make any judgments or why it's there, and I'm sure people have talked about it. But it's about as far away as you can get from literally everything from the golf course, and it's right on the corner of, you know, the major street, so.
Well, I mean,
I don't know what that looks like, how that's gonna be buffered, what's gonna be stored there.
No, it's the intent is to be heavily screened through there, that we're not driving through. Meridian's the main thoroughfare of the community through there. So any deliveries that would come through there would be off of Meridian, be very close to the maintenance facility. But it's intended to be set back so that it's not going to be a visible component through to the community, and you know, all the equipment will be contained within the facility.
And I'll tell you why I have a concern for that. So here at the airport, we have our maintenance department, and down to the east is the maintenance shed. And all the way far here to the west, they may need some maintenance from a backhoe or things like that, which certainly, you know, there could be some roads that may take a little longer, or some obstacles that backhoe would have to take if they stayed on airport property, and they find themselves just running right down Grow Road. So, you know, I'm looking at this and any maintenance activity going to the west, you know, or even going, certainly Meridian wouldn't be able to handle something like that if they get run over. But I'd like to see that more. And I don't want any comments on it. I'm just
No, I will tell you,
Things out where-
it's kind of funny, we're taking it from one corner and putting it to another corner.
Right.
So we're actually matching kind of the maintenance that's done primarily on this is obviously lawn care through there. It's really not a lot.
Well, it's mowers, it's tractors, and, you know, when you have a road like Horse Mill there, and you have to go down to the west, you know, things that I'm gonna be looking for is what's gonna prevent the guy driving the tractor and the mower
Well,
just
So we
get
will,
on Horse Mill and fly down to.
or on
the-
ferry you're talking about.
I mean, ferry, yeah.
That's
sorry,
right.
ferry.
No, we will prohibit that, and we don't have a problem with that all vehicles go into the course and do not come onto the roadway. That's a fair point through there. We're not looking to do that, and
Well, from a planning standpoint, it comes more of, well, we'll tell them no. From a planning standpoint, it needs to be planned where it just cannot happen. And that's just something that we don't see here, right? We just have a star.
Sure,
That area of phase 2, so.
no, we understand that there's multiple steps to
But
that.
John, honestly, most of the landscape equipment, once it's on the site, it services a site and it's driven on the site. It's not driven off the property. Even the actually opposite corner, the exact same scenario exists. Our equipment's there. The maintenance people come onto the site with their own vehicle, then they utilize the machinery onto the site, and it's the same distance whether you start from that corner or this corner. They still have to service and mow the entire golf course. And their equipment stays on the golf course. It doesn't go on the peripheral of the golf course and come back on. They've, not to my knowledge, and maybe the president or the vice president of the company.
way to go on.
Well, again, we don't need to, it just, you know.
No, I think
you're
you bring up a
probably
good
right.
point.
I mean, where it is now, there is no roads, right? It's just a golf course. And now you're planning on putting it over in an intersection of 2 roads. That's
Sure.
So logistically, it becomes a different location than it does way over on the northwest side of it.
Certainly.
Thank you. Steve?
Yes, one follow-up. So maybe I misheard it, and I haven't heard this before in any of our previous discussions. Did you say you plan on access to Phase 2 from Meridian or from Ferry? There'd actually be a cut in the curb and access the building from the road?
There would have to be an access for deliveries and such through that, and be a driveway cut through off of Ferry Road, not Meridian. But we would not, we can put that as a requirement in the conditional rezoning, that there would not be any equipment driven onto Ferry Road. That's not our intent. But we do need a curb cut off of that, but we intend to screen the facility back through there so that it's not an eyesore to any of the adjacent properties or anything like that.
Well, my comments, just in general, I definitely appreciated the quality of the concept review meetings. You know, it was an open, honest dialogue. There was an obvious willingness on the part of the applicants to meet not only the letter but the intent of what Groseal was trying to accomplish with his ordinances, and I definitely respect that. So thank you. As far as the development per se. This is the largest development of Groseal since probably the late 1980s. And certainly the only one I can ever remember that was associated with rezoning. So this is significant. This is not just your average run-of-the-mill subdivision plot plan coming in. This is a big deal. And when I see this, I kind of want to relate back to, well, why are ordinances, the way they are? Why are we zoned R1D? Why don't we have multiple families scattered around the island? And the reason is it all goes back to what was actually transpiring back in the 80s and 90s. It was a period of heavy development on the island with big projects coming up in front of the Planning Commission. And these projects were rolling through, and they were highly controversial. I mean, you folks that weren't here, there were Planning Commission meetings that ran until 2 in the morning, and they were every other week like that. and they were contentious, they were angry, and the citizens were mad, everybody was mad, okay? And, it all centered on the fact that the township was changing. And the citizens, were not pleased about that. At least not pleased in the way it was actually occurring. So what happened as a result? The charge was that we needed to manage growth. Not stop growth, but manage growth. How do we do that? First of all, a lot of the responsibility fell to the Planning Commission. So, it was our job when the applicant came in front of us to make sure that, what was written was what was actually executed in the project. The difficulties is that certainly back with the zoning ordinances as were written back in the 80s, there were a million gray areas that you could interpret one way or you could interpret another. Well, I can tell you which way, an applicant would be, and where the Planning Commission would be way over here, and you're looking at the same language. That's a problem, okay? Guaranteed conflict. So, how we dealt with that was really to kind of take a step back. The Planning Commission did planning. We did what was called a build-out analysis. We looked at the island from a futuristic perspective. We didn't use SEMCOG or anything like that. We had our planners work on it and said, look, with the current zoning, R1B, R1C, R1D, Macomb Street, all the rest, if we build this island out tomorrow and fill it up the way the zoning is listed, what's the impact on the island? Well, the impact was that instead of having a population of about 10,500, we would have a population of about 25,000. Okay, and everybody saw that number on the Planning Commission and said, holy cow, we can't allow that. What are we going to do about this? So one of the things that we did was eliminate PUDs, planned unit developments. So that got wiped out. But we added large lot configuration overlay, R1E, so that all the undeveloped property on the island, for example, all these 40-foot wide lots that you see on some of the older 1920s, 1930s subdivisions, which could have been built as 40-foot lots, literally, our ordinance overlay forced those into be 30,000-foot lots with 100-foot frontage, so that the type of growth that would come in would be consistent with what the community was after, managed growth. And we changed ordinances to that impact directly the cost of development. To make sure that the burden of cost that a developer actually had to carry was consistent with the fact that it was his development. Simple stuff like, gee, you're going to run a paved road all the way to the end, and you're going to connect it up with another road. You're not going to drop it at the end of your subdivision, okay? Because otherwise, the community's going to have to pick that up. Stuff like that. We also put in ordinances to protect the environment. Consistent with the state laws, woodlands and wetlands ordinances were enhanced and enforced. Now, in all this environment, 2000 rolled around, and we updated the master plan. In 2002 was when it finally, after 2 years of work and multiple input from various community elements, we came up with this very nice master plan. Okay? This documented the community values as they existed in September of 2002 as approved by the Township Board. Okay? It was on this basis that the overlay of all the zoning ordinances actually are supported. You can't have a zoning ordinance sitting out in the blue without having support from something in the master plan. Okay? So, we made sure that this was consistent with what the community wanted in 2002. Now, since that time, every 5 years, this has come back up in front of this Planning Commission. And we said, do we renew it? Or do we go back to the board and get $30,000 in order to do another one? And the answer has always been, at least until now, we're going to accept this as the baseline for our community. Well, the zoning that you see, R1D, and where you see multiple family, R2, and all the rest, that's all, the justifications for all that are right here. Okay? So, as we're moving ahead with this, I think planning commissioners need to be thinking about this in a couple of different ways. Is the master plan for this community incorrect? Okay? That's a judgment call. I mean, that is one of the baseline criteria that's in the rezoning section there, about 12 different criteria in the ordinance that outline each criteria about if you're going to rezone, these are the things that you have to consider. Okay? One of them is this master plan is wrong. Is it? That's a judgment. Okay? Beyond that, another criteria is financial. Okay? Now, our applicants tonight didn't mention that, but it was a big discussion point in our concept reviews. Why the number of units? Okay? 8 units under the R1D zoning do not have the financial impact to be able to support the other work that needs to be done on the site. Okay? You can't build a marina building only 8 houses on that property. All right? So the financial element of it comes into play because the inherent base project, the phase 1, has to support phase 2 and phase 3. Okay? Something for the Planning Commission to consider. Is that the intent of the zoning ordinance when it says there's a financial impact or need for this to be rezoned R2? You have to ask that question. You have to answer it. Okay? What else? Another one that's a criterion there. What about precedent? Okay? If this is zoned R2 and it's not consistent with the master plan, it's not consistent with the neighbors around it. Okay? Is that spot zoning? That's a question. What are you going to do when the next application comes in? Which, by the way, I was just informed there is one for another R2 conversion of single-family R1D lots. Okay? We're going what the community expects from this commission is consistent interpretation of the ordinances. Okay? However you all choose to do that. Okay? And the criteria that you can judge it against are not whether these fellows are professional, which they are, or clearly competent, or clearly interested in the community, which they are. Okay? That's not a factor. It's the 12 points that are in the zoning ordinance that you have to be able to say yes to in order to rezone. So that's the challenge as to what's coming up in the future meetings. Okay, we're going to go through each one of those points, and we're going to have to make a judgment. Because, rezoning, this, like I said, in all the years, the only rezoning we ever did was on Hickory Island. Since the late 1980s when I came on this commission. Okay, this is a big deal. So, this is going to be, have to be a lot of discussion and a lot of talk. And we're going to try and approach this very systematically to go through each one of these points. And everybody will have to make their own judgment. Okay, and once rezoning is the primary issue here. Oh, admittedly though, when the marinas came up, there was a lot of resistance from the neighborhoods to the marina as it was originally configured. But we worked through that. Okay, there may be more that we have to address. I don't know. I don't know what the neighbors are going to say about all this. But we're going to take it step by step, look at the ordinances, follow what's in there, and use those as the criteria for whether this is a good project or not a good project for Grosse Ile. And so that's what you can kind of anticipate. I hope that makes sense.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I think that makes all the sense in the world because it's true. I mean, there literally is no other way you can approach it. And it's interesting because, the first guys up here at this podium, when you're starting to talk about changing that document that I'm very well familiar with because that came through when we were on the board as well. You're talking about changing the direction and the desires of the community. So the concepts of whether those desires are reflected in the community become even more important to, I think, the Planning Commission and not our own individual desires. I mean, I could look at my desire and go, yeah, I think we need to have this type of housing and this and that, but what he said, what John just said, which is literally, for me, it hit home. It's the precedent. It's the, we decide on this particular project, we're deciding on future projects and what Groseal, how we define Groseal in our build out from this time on. And that's, like John said, now I get why, he has approached this with me and as the way that he did before tonight. And then just wanted to say, John, I love your leadership, and you come in here and you spell it all out the way that it has to be done for the good of the community. I want to thank you for that. I'm on 100% with what you just said.
Well, thank you. Appreciate the comment. Okay, well, that completes my comments. Would you guys like to add anything? Or?
The only thing I'd like to add is I think that I think the township is in a transition in that regard, and I think it's appropriate to look at that document and say whether or not times have changed enough that we have to modify. But one thing I will say that the Township Planning Commission always has a number of arrows in their quiver, in a sense, with the conditional. Each project has to stand on its own merits, in a sense. And I think in that regard, and I think we wouldn't present this to you if we weren't comfortable in the merits of our project through there. I have no idea about the other projects through that regard, but I can tell you from the board of the country club to working with Mr. Ferrante through there, and the uniqueness of this project with the active living that we're anticipating, that we're very confident that we stand on our merits, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
Well, I think speaking for Jay and for Steve, we completely understand your commitment on this. It was very clear. It was very clear to us in the meetings. So what's going to happen here, Brian, is we'll have to get together and schedule the next step down the road, and you and I will work that out, and then we'll get back to you guys, and we'll bring you back, and we'll work on this rezoning.
Thank you very much.
Fair enough? Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Mr. Chairman, just as a point of information, we actually have some old plats and drawings of what the island would have looked like had it been built out. I had them in my office. I think they're in the vault now, and it is, and it fully justifies the conversations that the community later had when these master plans were put together. I think they projected 5 elementary schools. That's what 25,000 people means to a community this size. So, very good point.
Okay. Thank you, Uda. Thanks, guys. Let's move on to a discussion. In your package, you saw a proposed municipal code change relative to marijuana. This was something that was requested ultimately from the Township Board through Dale Ream to Brian Borden to the Planning Commission. And, the Township Board was looking for Planning Commission review of this municipal code proposal, even though there was no zoning ordinance requirement, for us to do so. We're doing it because we were asked to specifically by the board as to whether we have any specific comments or concerns about this, and then if it is in within the discretion of the Planning Commission, they would like a motion or recommendation. Brian, I hope I summarized that correctly.
Yes, yeah. Because the proposed language would not be in the zoning ordinance. There's no requirement for formal public hearing. Technically, there's no requirement for a formal recommendation either. But I do think this is one of those things where in the past, the board and commission have kind of worked hand in hand. I think what ultimately Dale has asked me to bring before you tonight, if you are so inclined that you'd like to make a recommendation for the board's consideration, then you are certainly in a position to do so. But it is not required. I do think it would be I don't want to say that it would show that, we're all on the same page, but I do think there's something to continuity, consistency between Planning Commission and Township Board. So I like the idea of doing it this way. But again, that's going to be up to you all. I'm not trying to force anything upon you, especially with such a potentially controversial discussion topic as well.
The essence of this ordinance is the prohibition of recreational marijuana establishments. In other words, that's the end of it that's being addressed.
That's correct.
So there won't be a marijuana shop on Macomb Street or down at the airport or Commerce Park, wherever. It basically.
So I guess what's a marijuana establishment? What is that?
So, under the act that was passed in November, the Regulation and Taxation of Marijuana Act, it did open the door for recreational usage, sale, distribution, grow, etc. Outside of the medical. There were also 2 medical marijuana acts, as you all are probably aware. Unlike typical land use type regulation, the Regulation and Taxation Act put forth the idea that communities, not the idea, the requirement that communities have to, if they're not going to allow it, they have to formally opt out, is what it's called. They have to opt out of that act to prohibit establishments that would potentially could lawfully grow, sell, manufacture recreational marijuana, not the medical usage again. There's 2 different components to that. It's unlike really any other land use regulation that I've seen come through. Typically, zoning ordinances are permissive, land uses are permissive. We say what you can do in each district and how you can do it. We don't have to say what you can't do. This is, quite frankly, the entire act is relatively poorly written, in my opinion. It's very difficult for us to work with, but nonetheless, in order to essentially prohibit those types of establishments, the township would be best served to opt out. The other part of that conversation is that at this time, the state does not fully have all of their requirements in place for the licensing. So you'll still have to get a license through the state for the commercial aspect of it, if you will. And the state does not have in place its full procedures and its full regulations. They don't start accepting applications until December. So there's still some time, and I'm assuming they'll have it in place when those applications do start coming in. But we don't. It's hard for us to predict right now what those standards will be. So if this is a community or in another community that wants to allow this, even for those types of communities, in my opinion, the smart play right now is to opt out, because we can't write regulations when we don't know what the state's requirements are going to be. So there may come a time in the future, and it may be Grosse Ile, it may not be Grosse Ile. You can always rescind this down the road if it proves that the community wants this, there's an interest, there's a way to make it work. You can rescind the opt out and then put forth proper regulation in terms of the uses for commercial sale, growth, etc. So it's a very oddly written act in terms of what communities have to do, but I do think that not all of my client communities have acted on this at this point in time. The ones that have adopted opt-out ordinances.
Let's run around the table and see what folks think about this. Uda, Township Board perspective, please.
Township Board perspective, coming right up. I think part of this came out of the fact that our township attorney, I think, who's also on the zoning board, Thomas Sorty, was concerned that the township would get approached by entities that wanted to start a business of this sort on the island, and we would not be prepared with any kind of regulatory backup, so to speak. And having read too the Planning and Zoning News article, they admit, the state even admits that these 2 regulations for medical marijuana and recreational marijuana are not, they're very fuzzy, they're not clearly defined. But as Brian pointed out, prudently to opt out gives you then the option in the future to reevaluate and opt back in if it becomes something that the township wants to do. But I think what they're recommending is to opt out so that you can take the time to be prepared, down the road when the proposals start coming your way. So, and I think Supervisor Loftus and a number of the board members at the very least want to be prepared if these topics come up. That said, there are also board members who are just appalled that this is even a discussion item on any level in the state of Michigan. And there are other board members who feel like at some point, there is an obligation to follow voter intent. So it's not something that we can also just dismiss outright, I believe. So as the election official, in the 2018 election, for instance, Proposal 1 passed in the state. It passed in Wayne County. But on Grosse Ile, it lost, but by only 2.35% of the vote. So on some level, the voters in this community have not objected to this as strongly as you might imagine they would have. So it makes, for someone like me, it makes it harder to determine, will a regulation of this sort undermine voter intent? At the outset, though, we do live majority rule. So even if it's a slim majority, our community overall has said right now it opposes this option. So it's something I wanted to bring up as food for thought more than anything else. I mean,
would a recommendation from this commission, one direction or the other, on this help or hurt you?
I think that I think it would allow the board members to understand from a planning and zoning perspective, or from an ordinance and regulation perspective, that we've given them a tool that covers us moving forward, that we're prepared, that the industry out there knows that we've opted out, but at some point in the future, it does not prevent us from, say this turns out to be a well-regulated industry. Perhaps it turns out to be something that brings benefit to large spaces like the airport, et cetera, that we can then always, in time, reevaluate. It's not a knee-jerk reaction then. It's something that's been thought out and has a basis in experience and law.
I think your key point is that right now, it's way too ambiguous, and anytime it's ambiguous, that's a potential problem for the township. And so when it's not ambiguous, then the township can make a rational decision.
Exactly.
If I may, Mr. Chair, too, to kind of hit at some of the points Uta was making too, is some of the communities I work with, the act did pass overwhelmingly in many communities. Obviously, it passed statewide. Even in some of those communities, they are still opting out because of this window of uncertainty until the state has everything in order and until we really see what the full impacts and or benefits may be. Some of the other places I do work with are still taking that same approach. I want to put one other thing across too, just to make sure that we're clear on this. So I think this is kind of what Steve was getting at to start with. So this is the establishment. So this is the commercial aspect of it. The act did permit certain types of possession, usage, and growth within private residences and on your private property. This has no impact on that. The act, the law in Michigan now permits that, and opting out does not put you in a position where we're saying that private citizens cannot also follow what's allowed under law. This is strictly for businesses that would be licensed through the state under the Regulation and Taxation of Marijuana Act. Hopefully that makes sense.
Well, let's see what other members think here. Eric, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think the probably the prudent thing to do is to opt out while you're waiting and figuring out what the right laws are. But that being said, I don't think it's opt out and forget about it, because I think there are two aspects of it, right? I think there's the one aspect where you think of the smoke shop on Macomb where people are going to get high. And there's the other aspect of it that is a legitimate manufacturing business that might be located over here that's, wholesale manufacturing some product for sale elsewhere. And, if this was a cigarette making company that was going to employ, a bunch of people and pay good rent, is that something we would want? I don't know. But I think it's something that we need to not just totally forget about this thing, but we need to study what's potentially good for the island.
I think to
Go
piggyback
ahead.
on that, it's just a first step, as you're saying. To opt out would be a first step, but you can't just leave it there.
Right.
Points. I'm glad you went first. Brian, don't we have, what's in place? We have something in place right now. Nothing from years ago? 3, 4?
So what we did, so the original Medical Marijuana Act, many communities adopted a clause to kind of try it was kind of a workaround. They attempted to sort of, circumnavigate the statute by putting in place language that prohibited any uses that were otherwise prohibited by federal law. That type of language failed in court. So in essence, I can't remember if we did enact that here or not. If we did, it wouldn't hold any water when it came to medical marijuana anyway, because of the actions by the courts at that time. So we've done nothing, and the second act was the Medical Marijuana Facilities Act, and that act, like most land use and zoning related instances, basically if we did nothing, we didn't allow it. If we put the different definitions and the different uses and regulations into our ordinance, then we allowed it and regulated it accordingly. Again, the idea that zoning is permissive, not that we have to say, we can't list possibly everything that's prohibited. So to that end, that act did not require any action in order to disallow those facilities. So we've not incorporated regulations into the ordinance that would allow those facilities either.
And then, Eric made a great point about down the road. If we opt out now, we're not the final say. I'm assuming the board is
Correct.
But if we opt out 2 years down the road, an applicant comes with a great application, they can still propose it. And with an opt out, what does it take to opt in?
The board would have to rescind the ordinance, and we would have to put in place certain regulations allowing those uses in certain districts. Just like we would any other type of text amendment to the zoning ordinance, we would consider the nature of the use, what districts it's appropriate in. In this case, we would include definitions because there are multiple types of establishments, and then we would put forth the process. Is it permitted by right? Does it require special land use? Are there specific regulations? And that's where the uncertainty lies, is trying to put forth those specific regulations. For instance, a very common type of regulation for these uses is a spacing requirement, so that you have to be separated either from another such facility or from a school or from a church or even a residential district. But we don't know if that will hold water because we don't know what the state is going to put in place yet. So again, it's the uncertainty that's the real concern now. But if in the future, I think there's a couple ways to look at it. I think to keep an eye on it, and I think it's certainly, between administration, my company, the township attorney, we can keep the board and the commission apprised. And I think this time next year we'll know a lot more, because applications will be received by the state in December, and all but guarantee, it may not be here, but I can all but guarantee that all of us in our travels around the state are going to see this at some point in some other community. And to keep an eye on how it's working, to, obviously law enforcement has a lot of concerns with this under the new statute, and their ability to fully enforce what the law says. The operating a vehicle while impaired under this is going to be a really, really difficult thing for law enforcement, because it's not like alcohol. You can't just smell it on somebody's breath, because it doesn't have to be smoked to be ingested anymore. Somebody can eat a cookie and drive their car, and it's so there's a lot of I won't go down that path right now, but there's a lot of elements to that, and the benefits really for the most part would be viewed on a financial basis, and we don't know what that's going to look like yet either. The initial the way the act is written, communities that allow it would get a certain percentage of the tax revenue back based on it's tied to a ratio of the number of facilities you have in relation to the county and in relation to how much revenue that generated at the state level. And then those communities would get a little bit back. But so I couldn't even tell you, we couldn't even say what the financial implications are. If we allow one facility, it could be a, $25,000 boost to the tax base of the community, or it could be $55, and we just don't know. And again, that's where I get back. That part of it is also uncertain. And I do think that the smart play is the conservative play here, and that's to, I'm not normally a, reactive wait and see. My profession typically leads more towards trying to see the future, predict it, and make sure that we're well protected from it. But in this case, it's very hard to do that. Again, I do think this is the way to go for the time being.
Thank you.
So I guess a little different approach. I definitely understand and appreciate the topic and the vote that took place and everything, but I do struggle with yet another ordinance. It's in the list of how many of these that we have in this township. It's extremely tough right now. Our ordinance officer does a tremendous job. I applaud him daily, but yet another thing for us to try to manage and to follow up on. I don't know where this fits with all that, but I just struggle with, we're going to add yet another thing. Second, under section 4, violations and penalties, I don't know what a penalty is. So if I open up one of these places and you say you're going to get a $50 fine, I'm just curious what that is before we start to make more discussion, more thoughts. What is the penalty for this? If there's an ordinance, there's got to be a penalty.
I mean, that's not something I deal with. I don't truthfully
I guess
know.
who makes that up?
And
I would just like to add, I appreciate that this was in our packets, but this is just a blank template. I mean, these are all things that would have to be filled in, fill in the blank, so to speak, for Grosse Ile. And as far as I think ordinance enforcement is concerned, if I understand everything I've read, opting out now simply says to the industry, don't even come here, we're not interested right now. There are no applications coming to Grosse Ile at this point, right? There are no businesses trying to come in and establish themselves here. But I don't think this will add to the burden of the ordinance enforcement officer per se. This is a state-regulated business, and we're telling the state, don't consider licenses for Grosse Ile. Don't send anybody this way. That's what that.
So then, how
that's
can
what
there?
I
I
believe
guess.
that says.
Then what would, if it's regulated that way? Then how can there be a penalty if you're not going to get the certificate of approval?
Yeah,
So I'm trying to.
at that point, you'd be in violation of state law as well as local ordinance. So you've got a number of issues to deal with at that point. Yeah.
I'm just not sold that we need to go down this path. I'm not.
Well, if you don't, then an application comes in, and if you're not going to opt out, you need to develop regulations in your ordinance where and how you're permitting it. Those are your two options. Doing nothing is not an option, not in this case. medical marijuana and medical marijuana facilities, doing nothing was an option. This act, the way it's written, do nothing is not an option. And this is the better of the two options at this point in time, in my opinion.
Raythel, sir. Your thoughts?
Just out of point of interest, there's been, at the end of 2018, 61 communities in Michigan have opted out. So, but I find it interesting. We just had a presentation, a wonderful presentation that was arguably beneficial to the community. We're going to add new people. We're going to have homes come in. We're going to have recreation. We're going to have this whole thing. And let's not give our opinion. It's going to take forever. We're going to have all kinds of public hearings. We're just going to have to we're going to just make sure we do this right. Then the township board, who doesn't want to make a decision on their own, the elected officials of this community, just say yes or no. They say yes by doing nothing, and they say no by opting out. And they bring it to the planning commission. For what? For what? Give us opinion? Whether you want marijuana here or you don't, or you voted for or you don't. All it is an opinion. And if somebody came in front of this commission with an application to open up a marijuana shop on Macomb Street right now, whether we have ordinances or not, whether there's a plan of how we handle that or not, we'd have to deal with it. And I would hope that we would deal with it the same way as we deal with everything else. Not political. We don't have our opinion. We basically look and we do what's best for Groseal based upon public hearings, based upon all the research and things that this commission does. I think it's ridiculous that the township board threw this down here. From a planning standpoint, I see Brian. Brian's 3 steps ahead. Well, what happens if somebody comes to this podium? Well, for us, I'm not going to give you my opinion on that. I'm not going to tell you yes or no. I don't think that this commission needs to do that. Throw it back up to the township board, and whatever they decide, we'll deal with it here. Just kind of cut and dry to me.
Okay, thank you, John.
If I may, Mr. Chair, too, just because, essentially, I'm the one that put it on the agenda. This was done as a courtesy. I don't believe there was intent to, for the board to say, do your job. Quite frankly, I don't even, and I'd have to defer to Uta, I don't even know if the board knew that we were bringing it here. I did this because we've been working on it with the township manager.
I understand that, okay? I understand that, but every community has this on their plate. Every elected official, okay, in a city council or township board is looking at this to make a decision, and they need to make it now. So the fact that the township board has not, that I know of, discussed this, Uta, you tell me differently, but I don't think that they've had this on the agenda to say, you know what, do we need to do it?
Right. It's not been on the agenda, but on the few occasions where the township attorney has had a report to give to the board, this is the topic that he's brought to the board's attention. And then the board, I think, is maybe reacting to those prompts to say, we need help. What do we do next? That I did not know either until I saw our agenda when our packets came that this was going to be on the agenda. But I'm glad we're having this discussion because, too, if you read the information, there's a disconnect between what the public wants and what public officials believe on this subject. And so it's good
Uta,
that we talk about it.
You should know, okay, that sometimes as an elected official, you make a decision and you just go forward no matter what public opinion is, right? That you do what's best for the township.
But it doesn't hurt to know what public opinion is.
I don't know. I've not asked anybody, so I can't comment on what Groseal public opinion is and whether they want.
I think what you're saying, we represent the people in this community, and when we make decisions, the community is deferring to our either feeling of what the community wants or our experience and our knowledge of what the law allows. And so we are representative for what the people in the community want. And we have to balance that, whether we're on the planning commission or whether we're on the township board. We have to balance our own opinion, our own feeling, what we hear our neighbors and friends say, and then with what what does the law allow, and where do the two meet? And so I think, for whatever reason, the board has not discussed this. I will be taking this discussion to the board on Monday next week to say, this is the conversation that the planning commission had. And
But see, this is what drives me crazy, right? Because now the planning commission is involved with whether or not there's pot shops on Groseal. So anyone on this planning commission, whatever that topic of conversation is going to be and where it goes at the township board, okay, well, the planning commission was involved.
well, no, I mean,
You're not elected officials.
I can just
I mean,
as
come
easily,
on.
John, I can just as easily say, the planning commission basically had a very good conversation about this, but said, you're the elected officials, you do it.
Well, make sure that you say John Rathel said you're the elected official.
Well, they all
and
know
you
it
deal
now
with
anyway.
I'll tell you what. Let's bring this back to so we can get closure. At this point, is there anybody who would care to make a motion either to make no comment about this or to offer an opinion to the township board? Motion one way or the other, please.
Just before a motion, I would like to have just a quick discussion about whether a findings of fact is in order, right? So the findings of facts would say something to the effect of, with all the uncertainty in the laws, we don't know how to regulate this type of thing on Groseal at this point in time. We would recommend that Groseal opts out until more information is known.
I think that sounds like a motion. Is that a motion, Eric?
Sure.
And it's a support.
We have a motion and support. Brian, you get the gist of that? Okay. Is there additional discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
On the surface, I think that makes sense, right? We're going to recommend that we opt out because of some of the thoughts that were given here today about how potentially we can opt in. But we really don't know how to opt back in. No one's ever opted back in. What will it take? What kind of action down the road? So having a recommendation of just opting out and not knowing really how we'd ever be able to get back in if we do that, and not understanding that from the planning commission's perspective, I think we'd be making a recommendation of not knowing all the facts. And like you said, Eric, we need to deal with facts on this.
So the intent that I would have, right, is the opt-in would be an ordinance change, right? We'd have an opt-in ordinance, or here's what's allowed, right? We allow manufacturer facilities. We don't allow use facilities. We allow, if we do allow a manufacturing facility, here are the parameters that you must operate within.
But is that a planning commission issue, or is that a township elected official position to opt back in?
Well, it ultimately would be both, because it will require rescinding of the opt-out language, and then it would require introduction of an amendment to the zoning ordinance, which would go through planning commission.
And the opt-in, as I understand it, would be the township board, okay? But to do that, if someone comes up in front of us and said, I want a facility, and I'm sitting here saying, well, what ordinances apply? Okay, and I look at my ordinance sideways and I still can't find anything, that's a bad thing. Okay, so before there would be an opt-in, there would be some judgment, I'm assuming, from the state that says these are the broad rules. Township, make ordinances. So this commission would sit back and we'd figure out all the things that we have to have. Where, when, how, scope. Okay, we would make an ordinance preparation that we would send to the township board for them to approve. And at the same time they would opt in, they would have an ordinance that they could approve immediately, so that if the next day somebody showed up, we're ready. That's my view on it.
Right. When we look at different use of, the marijuana industry, all right, you have the retail shop, like you said, Eric, and then potentially a commercial grow facility. So if we look at Groseal, and I think this is why it needs to be looked at more comprehensively within Groseal, because we have potential spaces, within the Commerce Park or whatever to do something, and that may be totally acceptable to the township, right?
but something on Macomb Street that, is a smoke shop or something like that, maybe that's not acceptable. So if you opt out, and I don't know the answer to this, I'm just saying, if you opt out, how difficult now is it to get back in to do what is going to be benefit?
I don't have, I know that somewhere in this planning and zoning, there was a line about it, but one of the things that I did highlight is that if you, quoting, there would be a good chance of litigation if a community attempted to prohibit a marijuana establishment after December 6, 2019, and it did not have an ordinance in place prohibiting all marijuana establishments or those it did not want to allow. So again, the law, if I read it correctly, the law allows you to ultimately tailor an ordinance to allow a scope of establishments that you think the community would support, right? And you drew a comparison between, the head shop versus the production facility. So I think what they're advising us is if you don't know yet where your community stands and what specific things you can tolerate and won't tolerate, you should opt out until such a time as you can make those determinations. Because if you don't have that opt-out in place and December 2019 rolls around and you suddenly get a proposal and now you can't just say no. Now you have to struggle to find a reason why you want to say no, and you don't have an ordinance to back you up. You don't have a regulatory backbone or framework to back you up. So I understand what you're saying because right now, we've got a blank slate in front of us, and we've been tossed a ball essentially, right? The board kind of tossed this ball to the planning commission, and we could, in all honesty, just toss the ball right back and say, hey, you take the ball. But I think Eric's motion makes the point that says we have the ability to create this outline for the board, but not at this time. We're not ready. So we're saying opt out until we're ready.
We're saying that, Uda, all right? But what we're actually saying in the motion and what we're saying as a group is that we want, as a community, to opt out, and we don't want any of this. These communities that have opted out have basically said, we do not want retail. They're not saying from a planning commission's perspective, well, let's opt out so we can design some ordinances later on this. They're saying, and they're coming out, and a lot of them came out right away of saying, we do not want this type of business in our community. Do we risk by just saying we recommend opting out, the perception, even though it's shrouded around the ordinances that we don't have, and we need to kind of take a look at this, are we running the risk of the planning commission's position is we don't want pot shops on Groseal. They recommended opting out. It's a risk that I don't know if do we want to do it.
I think the alternative then is to hustle and put together a set of regulations that allow us to opt in on a very limited scale, and I think that would be a lot more tricky to do in a hurry. And here they show that there are different communities that have opted in on medical marijuana and opted out on recreational marijuana. There are communities that have opted out on both, and there are communities that have opted in on both. So there are a lot of options to tangle with.
Well, there's not an opt-in. There's only an opt-out. If you don't opt out, you're in. So this planning commission, if we want to do our due diligence to be prepared when that guy comes to this podium and wants it, until the board says, no, we opted out, I think that we're being derelict in our duties, Brian, if we don't start developing ordinances for this. Until they come and say we're out.
That's the whole problem, though, is I can't tell you how you can regulate it right now because the state can't tell us how it's going to be regulated. So I can't draft you an ordinance right now that I can't. Let me take that back. I can, along with the township, we can draft you an ordinance. Whether or not it would stand up in any court after December of this year is completely up in the air because we would be creating our own set of regulations that could conflict or be contrary to what the state comes up with, in which case it's probably not going to hold up in court. I don't want to do that. I don't think that's the right move. That's my opinion.
Okay, folks, I'd like to call the question.
Well, I just want to add one more. I did find it on page 8 in this Planning and Zoning News. It says whether your community does or does not allow marijuana facilities of any type, it is safest by officially letting Lara know where it stands now. Your community can change its mind in the future as more is known and other communities share their experiences with regulation. And of course, then they say if you're still confused after reading this, talk to your township attorney.
Okay.
Maybe we punt this back to the attorney.
Well, by default, I mean, the township board's making the decision.
All right,
We're making a recommendation. They've got to make the decision.
We have a motion on the floor that Eric has put together. It's been supported by Uta. I'm calling a question. All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
Opposed.
We have one nay.
Abstain. Can I abstain?
No.
You can't.
No, one or the other, yes or no.
Are you financially conflicted?
So if I vote yes. Thanks, Eric. No, I'm gonna vote no. I think it's the township board's responsibility.
Okay, the motion passes 4-2. Please prepare the findings of fact. And I think what just happened at this commission is a reflection of what Uta just described early on about the different opinions at the township board. It is not unanimous, okay? And I think we saw tonight the same sort of different perspectives being shared, and that's good. Please make sure that in the findings of fact, make sure the motion was 4-2, okay? The negative vote needs to be reflected. That's clear?
Mr. Chair, however, the discussion that we had here wasn't our own personal views and beliefs of whether or not we've...
No. It's from a planning perspective. And Uta, if the township board, wishes to have a merit, at some point in time, 6 months from now or whatever, once an ordinance written, their responsibility will be to provide guidance as to what the overview is so that we as a commission can fill in the blank and work the details. We cannot, it can't just be thrown over the fence and say, create something. So, that'll be the board's responsibility to the planning commission. Okay?
Yep.
Thank you. All right. Does anybody need a break or do we want to continue on to the end of the meeting?
Keep going.
All right. Bayview. We'll cover these items rather quickly. We had the Bayview public hearing for rezoning at the last meeting. One of the things that came up was that there might be some uncertainty about lot area. Lot area was the driving force for the high number of nonconformances for the coverage that we had. We had high percentages that were not in conformance. The assumption along the way, the basis of the numbers that were used in our study was the township assessor. What we came to find out is the township assessor definition of taxable area versus the zoning definition of lot area are two entirely different things. And in fact, the lots are considerably bigger than what the tax assessor actually assesses. And as a consequence, when Brian reran the numbers going to the plat book, calculating the area of the actual lots per the zoning ordinance, what he found was that the issues of massive variances for the coverage disappeared. And instead of being 50 or 60%, it was now 10%, which is totally tolerable.
Right.
So, at a high level, when we met and talked about it, and you work those numbers, the recommendation is that basically this is not necessary. We do not need to rezone based on the fact that we have now cleared up the definition of land area. So, in discussions with Brian, since we sent a letter to all the residents, advising them of this potential change, we owe them a letter telling them that we're not making the change and the reasons why. So it was a very useful exercise that we went through. We discovered a discrepancy that, in our understanding of land area, and I think the issue resolved itself without any further action, which is a good thing. Any questions on that?
Just to be sure then, so a letter will be written to the...
Yes, because at the last meeting they did ask for follow-up, and the idea was either we were going to find one of two things: either the numbers were right or the numbers weren't right, and either way it was either going to come back before this body with the neighborhood invited again, or in this case, I don't think we needed to do that. So the idea will be we'll draft up a letter, we'll explain the situation, and we'll let the neighborhood know that the study is concluded and no changes to the ordinance are proposed.
Everybody all right with that? Okay, let's move on. Time change for planning commission meetings. This is something that rolled through the township and came to us as a request. Did we have any interest in changing the planning commission meeting from its standard 7:30 time to, I believe, 6:30? Was that it? What was the exact time?
So, yeah, the exact time wasn't necessarily suggested. I think it's just every year or two, it seems as though the boards and commissions take a look at their timing and see if they want to change it. The Zoning Board of Appeals did alter a few years ago from 7:30 to 7, and at their last meeting they pushed it back from 7 to 6. They're going to start even earlier now. So it's been presented to this body again for any thoughts if you'd like to move it up a little earlier. It was not indicated that it needed to be 6 or 6:30 or 7, just simply would an earlier start time work for this commission, and is that something that you'd be interested in doing?
Brian, given that we have 3 members who aren't here, and we may be conflicting with work schedules and other things, I would prefer to wait on this until we get all 9 commissioners here before we would consider any change. Is that acceptable to people? Okay. So, Brian, let's just bring this back on the agenda at the next meeting.
I guess just a follow-up comment. I haven't lived here for 30 years, but since 2007, it'd be nice if somehow the township will get out there and try to get a feel for it through whatever the surveys are available to us, to the people, what would work for them if they want to become more engaged in being in the public at different meetings, coming to the township board or coming to whatever the different commission meetings are, because they are at all varying different times, and I've gone to a handful of them at these different times, and the audience isn't really packed. So I don't know if that's a function of lack of interest, a function of bad time, or what it may be, but what can we do to really drive some attendance in these audiences, or change it so I guess people want to be visible here. They may be watching on TV, which is great, but how do we get people here? Because right now that's the only time that we can hear their voices, hear the discussion, and have that Q&A session back and forth.
Very true. All right, let's go to annual election of officers. Given the time, I'm gonna propose something, and if people don't like that, then we'll go through the standard method of one at a time. Basically, we are obliged on an annual basis to elect our treasurer, secretary, treasurer, and a vice chair, and a chair. Okay. Steve's our secretary. Jay is our vice chair, and I'm the chair. I think everybody's familiar with the duties that we have in our various functions. So I'm not going to spend the time going through that. I would ask the commission that if there is a sentiment for somebody who would like to run for one of the positions, please state. Otherwise, I would ask for a motion of consensus to continue with the people that are currently in the positions to move things along. Any,
So moved.
we have a motion from John. Is there support?
Support.
Support from Jim. Discussion. Call a question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. I'm sure Jay appreciates it as well. He's out there gritting his teeth.
Thanks, Steve and John and Jay.
I understand that's called voluntold.
Yes. Very good. I like that. Okay, thank you, everybody. Let's go to the next meeting
No,
date.
thank
Brian, I don't think we're in a position to set anything at the moment, are we?
No, it really will depend on what the next step is from the West Shore group. That's really the next.
Why don't you and I get together on it, and what we'll do is then we'll select some dates and have people, opt in if they can.
I would at least offer up. April does give us the wonderful 5th Monday, so which us meeting first Monday in March, 5th Monday in April, should they submit something for formal review and public hearing and find that it's ready. We do have a couple options in April that would probably give us sufficient time. But again, that's dependent upon a submittal coming forth. At this time, we don't have anything else that's pending.
Okay, well then, we'll leave it basically open. Think about April. We'll see what happens, and we'll be in touch. Okay, that completes the formal agenda. Does anybody have anything else that they would like to add or comment on about the next meeting?
Just to keep in mind that I think that first weekend in April, Groseville schools are off, so there'll be a lot of people.
Okay. Definitely not that.
Oh, we'll be with you. To the Keys we go.
Gee, I somehow missed my invitation.
You're all welcome.
There you go. There it is.
Okay, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.
I just have to confirm it with my in-laws.
Oh.